It's all yours.
Hello, yay! Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to Dojo Live, connecting with experts like you. My name is Kim Landis, and today I'm joined by two of my fellow Nearsoftians, Carlos Ponce, as usual, but this time he's connecting from the Mountain Travel Symposium in Banff, Alberta, Canada. Hi, Carlos.
Hello,
Hello.
everyone.
And we have with us Jorge Chavez, one of our Java developers here at Nearsoft. And Jorge is passionate about and has about 5 months, I believe, learning a new language, which is Elixir. And that brings us to today's guest, who is Ben Marx, a lead developer at Bleacher Report and a recent speaker at Elixir Days. Hi, Ben.
Hello. How are you?
Thank you. Good, thanks. I'm excited. Thank you for joining us today. And it's a really good thing that Jorge is here with us because, as most of you probably know, neither Carlos or I are developers. And so we have him wingmanning with us as today's conversation is going to be a bit more technical. So, Ben, you've chosen to talk to us about the lessons you've learned from Elixir while in production. So please tell us a bit more about yourself and Bleacher Report, of course, and why it is that you chose to adopt Elixir.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so I'll start out with Bleacher Report first. So Bleacher Report is the second biggest sports platform in the US behind ESPN. And we focus on personalizing content so you can follow your favorite teams, your favorite players. And Bleacher Report was really the first one to do this about 7 years ago. And over the past few years, as the landscape has changed from desktop to mobile and the way that people consume news and alerts on the internet has really caused us to question the way that we designed our system. And that's where Elixir comes in. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But my background is I don't have a traditional computer science background. I studied philosophy and economics. And a lot of the metalogic classes that we took in philosophy, you ended up having to write proofs, and you had to prove them. The full background in computer science, I had the functional part.
I'm sorry, Ben. Did everybody else catch that, or did it pause for you guys too?
Yeah.
I left off at philosophy and the need to write proofs.
Oh, okay. So essentially what I was saying is that in the logic classes, we had to write proofs, and we proved them in many ways using functions. And that was how I got started. That was what interested me first in programming. And when I did object-oriented programming for a long time. I did PHP, and then I did Ruby. And I really loved Ruby a lot, but I was interested in doing functional programming. So I started looking into different functional programming languages, like Clojure was the one that I spent a lot of time on. But I could never really click with me. I mean, I enjoyed writing it a bit, but it wasn't easy, or it didn't flow in the same way that Ruby did. And then I happened to stumble upon Elixir, which is a functional programming language, and it looks very similar to Ruby, and it feels right somehow. And then I was looking, and when I started programming with Elixir, I started looking for companies that were using Elixir, and it turns out that Bleacher Report was using it, and I live in the Bay Area, and Bleacher Report's in the Bay Area, and I joined Bleacher Report. And so the reason that Bleacher Report turned to Elixir was because, like I mentioned earlier, the transition from desktop to mobile. And the big thing was customization and personalization. So when you subscribe to all these players and teams, it's really hard to cache that. And we're having some trouble with Ruby because it doesn't do these things on the fly very well. And then so you had all these various caching strategies that were difficult to troubleshoot and didn't hold up that well over time. And Elixir on top of Erlang, and Erlang's about 30 years old, and it was built for the telecom industry, which does billions of things at once. And so we're able to leverage the same things that allow Ericsson to use Elixir, or to use Erlang for all of their telecom, for all the telecoms. We're able to leverage the same things. So that's basically, in a nutshell, why we chose Elixir.
Very cool. Thank you. So how successful has that adoption been, or what other benefits have you seen? You're really happy with it?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways it exceeded our expectations. But everyone is very happy with Elixir, not just from the developer point of view, but from the stakeholders, the business people, everyone is happy. I mean, it's been really interesting because when I started, there were, including me, there were a couple of other people who were doing Elixir full-time or maybe half-time. Or, I mean, what kind of surprised me is, looking back on my time at Bleacher Report, I think I've written about 300 lines of Ruby code, which is kind of incredible. It just shows how much time I've spent writing Elixir, which is, a couple of years ago, had you said you're going to not write Ruby anymore, you're going to write a new language called Elixir, I would have been very surprised because I really loved writing Ruby. And that's not a knock on Ruby so much as it is just how much I've enjoyed Elixir. And so basically we found an area of our system that was having trouble handling the load because the number of users that we have has increased exponentially over the last few years, and we were able to find that piece of the system that was having trouble, and we ported that to Elixir. So fake it a little bit, which doesn't make for efficient code, but it works well enough. And so even as like Elixir neophytes, we were able to port this system to Elixir, and it performed really, really well. And in addition to that, we were able to save a lot of money on servers because you can just do a lot more with a lot less with Elixir. And part of that has to do with the Erlang VM and the way that the schedulers work. So if you have 8 cores, you have 8 schedulers, which means you can take advantage of this. So there's no more of that. There's no distinction between single-threaded and multi-threaded. And Elixir and Erlang take advantage of all of the things that the modern computer CPU has to offer with multi-cores.
Awesome. Jorge, given that, do you have anything? You're the developer here, you're the programmer, you're the one who's learning it. Take advantage of this expert, or
okay.
we hope that you haven't. Ask him his questions.
Okay, well, I know that you choose Elixir because of the performance and all that, but my question is, like, did you evaluate like another programming language like Go or Scala before moving to Elixir?
Yeah, well, first, I think there's like 6 Elixir developers, or 6 Elixir experts, which would be like the Elixir core team. But so I'm still very much a learning and still everyday learning. So it's a fun
more
thing.
experience. Then
Yeah,
how about let's leave it at that?
Yeah, Go was considered, and then Node was considered as well. And it was, but Elixir was sort of the bet to take, I think. Like that was the one that was the most effort was put into learning Elixir.
Okay, I think that was kind of like the easiest way to move to another language because you were using Ruby, right? And Elixir is similar to Ruby, talking about syntax.
Yeah, I think that was a great design decision on Jose Valim, the creator of Elixir's part. Because if you look at Erlang syntax, it looks like Prolog, but that was the previous generation. Erlang took from Prolog, but if you ask a developer in San Francisco how many of them know Prolog or know Prolog or Erlang syntax, there's going to be very few of them. So by making Elixir look like Ruby, it was a great idea, and it's sneaky as well because you get sucked in until you realize that things are quite different. But by that point, you've already made a commitment to it. So then the barrier to entry is that much easier. So that when you do come upon these stumbling blocks, you have at least sort of a syntactical way to get past it.
I like that you mentioned stumbling blocks. So what are the biggest stumbling blocks for people who are interested in making this adoption, this transition? For you, what were the biggest challenges and what workarounds did you find?
I think, well, when we started with Elixir, 2.5 years ago, the language had just reached 1.0. There weren't very many guides. There weren't very many libraries. There weren't very, there wasn't an established way to do things. So part of the problem was we don't really know what we're doing. Are we doing this right? Are we doing this wrong? We don't know. This seems to be working out. So that was a lot of it was just us looking to each other and being like, this looks right, and then or finding stuff online or just, because Jose Valim at the time and still does was writing a lot of articles about it. So then we would just use what we could find. So that was hard to do, but at the same time it was good because Phoenix, which is the web framework that for Elixir, we adopted that at like 5/dev, which is very, very, very early on in the life cycle of the framework. And so they were releasing releases, fairly constantly, maybe twice a month or once a month. And because it's pre 1.0, there's going to be breaking changes. So part of what we inculcated during that time was that whenever Phoenix updates, we need to update it as well. And by having these constant refactoring and iterative cycles, we were able to keep up with it, and we learned a lot faster. And that was sort of ingrained that with this new language, if we're going to succeed with it, we need to constantly reevaluate how we're doing stuff. And when I say constant, I mean, every month or 2 months, we have, based on like the release cycles of Elixir and Phoenix and so on, we take time to go back to see how we can reevaluate things and move forward. So that was really helpful. Other things that people tend to have a little bit of trouble with is moving from object-oriented to functional programming. For me, it was kind of a relief, because this is what I studied in college in terms of the logic side of things. So it was like, oh, this actually makes sense to me. Object-oriented was always a bit stranger for me. And recursion, I think, because another thing is, how do you loop over something? You can't do a for each loop in a functional programming language because of the immutable data. So you have to use recursion, and that's one of those tricky things that you don't really understand until you do. Like, you can't halfway understand recursion. So that's been one of the things that, and also when teaching other people, you tend to learn what you know and you don't know, and you kind of improve over time. And
yeah, it must be hard. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, another thing was when we use New Relic for all of our Ruby monitoring, and we used them for a long time. And when we adopted Elixir, we're like, how do we monitor this stuff? We don't know how to monitor this. Fortunately, since Elixir sits pretty seamlessly on top of Erlang, you can use Erlang libraries within Elixir without any real issue. So we use this Erlang monitoring library called Exometer. And you're used to Ruby seeing things like if your traffic increases, the CPU increases, and then it gets to a certain point, you add another instance, and so on. And when we were first using Exometer, we were seeing CPU use at 3%, and it wasn't varying at all. So I was convinced that I was doing something wrong, because this has to be wrong. Like, how can we're getting all this traffic on the production system, I'm only using 3% of the CPU. So it just turns out that that's just the way it is because Erlang is much more efficient at doing with the multi-cores. So that was a nice surprise and a nice stumbling block in a way, I guess.
And probably that is something that I can hear myself.
Sorry?
I'm sorry, I can hear myself. Yeah, I was going to say that probably that is something that Ruby cannot handle, right? Like those kind of traffic stuff. So that was a great idea with a project that has too many people like visiting the site. It's pretty nice to use Elixir in order to handle that kind of traffic.
Yeah, and I think, but it's not. I think Elixir is also the case. Like if I started a project tomorrow, even if I expected only a few visitors, I would still use Elixir, just because I think it's a lot. I don't know, the mental model you have in your head for Elixir projects is much easier for me than other object-oriented programming. So I don't think so. While like for us, the ability to do millions and billions of things at once is incredibly helpful. But even if you're a small company, I think Elixir would be a good choice for you for similar reasons. So I don't think, like, if you're considering an object-oriented programming language versus Elixir, I still think Elixir or Erlang are the better way to go, just because of the fact that of the Erlang VM, because going back to this, being able to take advantage of all the cores of the CPU, that's built in. You don't have to. Everyone who's programmed Ruby or Python or had to deal with single threading and multi-threading libraries, there's always something that ends up giving you trouble. I mean, we've had problems with this here as well. So you don't have that at all with Elixir, regardless of your size.
Yeah, it's a pain to work with threads in, like, let's say like me, that I'm a Java developer. Working with threads it's a pain. So I have worked a little bit with Elixir, and it's pretty easy to to work with concurrency in threads, right? So now that you were mentioned about like the early. I'm sorry. Now that you were mentioned about how you moved from Ruby to Elixir, what are those things that, in your opinion, are like tips that you can say to another people that want to move their stack from any language to Elixir?
Well, I guess there's different, like, I think taking small chunks if possible. So if like we had a monolith and we were breaking it out into microservices, so it was pretty easy for us to say, okay, so this part of the monolith is doing well, or these parts are doing well, this part is causing trouble, so let's pull this out first. And I think that's a pretty good way to go about it, by order of necessity. Like if we had to move all of our functionality from Ruby to Elixir, then we'd still be on Ruby because it would be a massive undertaking. I mean, this is gonna, it'll probably take us, I don't know, a year or so to move everything still. So by doing things in small composable chunks, that's a good idea. Also, it's really easy, relatively easy, let's say, to port existing stuff to Elixir or whatever language you're using, because you already understand how the flow should work. So that helped out a lot actually when learning Elixir, because even though a lot of the early code was very Ruby influenced, because that's the language that we knew. I mean, of course, whatever language you write in most of the time, that's going to have influence on the next language. So we understood that. But fortunately, the Erlang virtual machine does a great job of making inefficient code efficient. So even though, like, I look back at the code that I wrote 2 years ago, I'm like, oh, this is really terrible. But at the same time, it worked really well for us. So it's nice to see that progress. And also, like, the way that we did it was sort of by training developers. It wasn't everyone learn Elixir at once. It was who's really interested in Elixir. These people spend their time learning Elixir and porting stuff over. And then as we all became more proficient in Elixir, other people started to become interested in Elixir. And then once we saw the success that we were having with Elixir, and we decided, okay, any consumer or customer-facing service has to be written in Elixir. So at that point, we set out to train all of our developers. So I guess the takeaway then is move small chunks of functionality at a time, and don't try to train everyone at once. Train the people who are really interested in it. And also, like, if you're considering adopting Elixir or anything else, if you don't have the full support or the majority of the people on your team, it's going to be really hard, because if everyone likes programming in Java and you're trying to force them to learn Elixir, it's probably not going to work out very well. But yeah, so gauging the interest, and also another thing is to manage the expectations of the stakeholders, because you're going to end up, when you're diverting your resources from future development to learning a new language, of course, development is going to slow down a bit. So expressing that to the stakeholders so that they understand that during this interim, you're going to have a bit, development is going to be a lot slower, but the payoff is that you're going to almost definitely be paying less money on servers, and you're going to be setting up a platform that should last, for 10 years, 10, 15 years. I mean, I think that's the takeaway.
Yeah, and is there any book that you recommend for people who are trying to learn Elixir?
Yeah. Elixir book by Dave Thomas is sort of the foundational book for Elixir developers, just like the Pickaxe book was for Ruby developers. Programming Phoenix by Chris McCord, the creator of Phoenix, and Jose Valim and Bruce Tate is a great resource for learning Phoenix. And then, there's lots of good articles. Platform Attack, Jose Valim's company, has great articles from him and other developers there about how to use Elixir. So I think that should get you be enough to get you started with the language.
Yeah, Kim, do you have any question?
I was just wondering, you had mentioned that Elixir is good for any consumer-facing company. So, like, what other notable companies are there that have, or that you're aware of, that have adopted Elixir? And have you seen that they've also experienced the same benefits as Bleacher Report?
Yeah, let's see. There's Pinterest uses Elixir, and they've had great success with that. Steve Cohen he worked at Pinterest. He gave a talk at our Elixir meetup last year and talked about similar things that they've done. Like they use Java, and they use Python and Java, and they ended up. He showed the savings in terms of like the efficiency for I believe it was the notification system that they rewrote in Elixir. So they were thrilled with that, and as from what I understand, they're working with more with Elixir. Discord, which is another local company, is using Elixir. They have really very good blog posts about Elixir. Square Enix, the video game company, they're doing some stuff with Elixir. I'm not sure exactly what, but they have open sourced some of the stuff that they're working on. Let's see, who else? In the country that are using Elixir. Dockyard is a consulting company that was a Ruby company, I believe, and now they're doing Elixir. Chris McCord, the creator of Phoenix, works at Dockyard. Let's see, who else? Netflix is using Elixir. I'm not sure for what exactly, but Lauren Tan and I can't remember his name. He spoke at the Erlang conference last week. They both have given talks about how Netflix is using Elixir, or how they've used Elixir in production. Let's see. I think that's sort of all that I can think off the top of my head. I'm sure I'm forgetting.
That's okay. I also, and not that I'm going to know any of this, and maybe it's even a stupid question, but I recently helped a Nearsoftian write a blog in English, which is why he solicited my help, talking about the advantages of microservices against monolithic. And you had mentioned that, and so is Elixir used is best for one of those types, or is that something that you have to adopt to as well?
I don't know. I guess this is a contentious topic, because some people would argue that because you have this concept of umbrella apps in Elixir, so basically that means you can have multiple applications running independently of each other. That's sort of a single application of microservices, and then other people do microservices. And I think it depends on the person you ask on which one is better and why they would use why they do things that they do with it. But the reason that we chose microservices was because we were like, when you it was a lot easier for us to do it that way, because by breaking things out into functionality, we had dump all of these different microservices into an umbrella app and do a little bit of finagling, and then we would have the umbrella app architecture. But I think it's a matter of personal preference, and also the size of your company. I mean, when you're working with multiple developers and having things in one repo can be a bit more confusing. But I think it just depends on the company on which path you would take.
Okay, I have a question. Well, let's say that I have, like the next big idea, the next millionaire idea, right? And I will create a project. What is that Elixir has that any other language has? I mean, we already know the concurrency, scalability, and all that. But what is that specific thing that you think that Elixir has that I cannot find in any other language?
I mean, you would find it in Erlang as well, I guess, but the reliability, reliability, and also the fact that, I mean, when you change technologies, you don't want to do this every couple of years, every 5 years, every 10 years. I mean, it's an expensive and arduous task to move from one language to another. So if you're going to move to language, there should be compelling reasons that this language will be around for a long time. And I think that's probably, from business side as well, that's a good selling point, because you know that if you have this language that, because of the way that the virtual machine is designed, and as we continue to move along this multipolar world, Elixir will still perform. Any time a core is added, it'll be more performant. So it's not like you're not sacrificing anything by getting better hardware. It's very efficient. And then also the fact that most companies, you start out small and you want to grow. Elixir is very good at handling that. For instance, like there are major sporting events throughout the year. Of course, you have the Super Bowl, the NFL draft, the NBA finals, and various soccer tournaments and championships. And we can, you can prepare for those with auto scaling or whatever. So if your traffic increases, then you have these things that kick in, or that we average this amount of traffic for this event, so we should adjust our server count by this much. But the thing that you can't really account for is spikes in traffic. Like, for instance, when Kevin Durant went to the Warriors, I guess it was last year, our traffic, I think, quadrupled, within a couple of minutes. So even if we had even if we had employed great auto scaling strategies, it would have taken a little bit of time for the other servers the other instances to come up, and you might have had some people not getting access to the site or whatever. And this is when we need people to come to the site. If we have breaking news, we want to be the first one to deliver it, and we want to be able to handle the load of people who come to the site. So with Elixir, we don't really have to worry about that. It was, we didn't even know that the traffic had spiked that much. Like, we were sitting, doing whatever, and then someone looked at our analytics and like, traffic spiked 4 times. Like, yeah, we didn't know that. So I think that's really a testament to why you should choose Elixir, is that you don't have to worry so much. I mean, of course, you should always take into account these kind of things, but you don't have to worry so much about planning for the unplannable, because we can't plan for breaking news. But if we have a system that can handle this, both on the push notification side as well as on the server side, then I mean that's a win-win.
I like the way that you say, like, oh, we have 1 million people in our site. It doesn't matter. We have Elixir.
Well, I mean, broadly, but yeah, that's really helpful, I think. Because if you're starting something new, I don't see, if you're starting something new and you want it to last for a long time, I would be hard pressed to choose another language other than Elixir.
Oh.
I think that's a good point. I'm understanding the benefits are really the immediate from the on-go room for growth, which everyone who's starting something hopes to be the case. And then the idea that the time and the culture in which we live, that breaking news, that you have no idea what's going to cause you to spike. I mean, it could be a dancing cat for all we know, for whatever reason, and Pinterest takes off, and all of a sudden everyone's always interested in cats. But I really like that idea. One of the things, I mean, we're talking about, you were talking about Bleacher Report and just how large it is and the size of your teams. Teamwork and everything, I think, at any tech company, but especially at Nearsoft, is something that we take very seriously. And we have our methods of training, and we have our methods of communicating. When it comes to training on Elixir or that communication, what types of dynamics and methods do you guys at Bleacher Report use, and what have you found to be helpful?
Well, when we first started, like Dave Marx, who's our senior engineering director, was, whenever we were like, I don't know what we're doing, he was always like, reasons why we've been so successful with Elixir. By having support from like the directors and from the stakeholders has been really helpful, because we make mistakes, we continue to make mistakes. We some various times cause some production issues, but that's going to happen, and we always had the support of everyone above to do that. I think that was really important, because of course, we never want to have the site go down, or we never want the app to be unresponsive. But the reality is that occasionally things will go wrong, or hopefully rarely things will go wrong, and to not worry so much that you make a mistake that you're going to be scared from trying something new. So having an open environment from both that, but among the other developers as well. So what we've moved toward when you're first starting with Elixir, read the Programming Elixir book, not the whole thing, but just enough to understand the syntax and semantics of the language, and then we'll give you small tickets, maybe a refactoring from an old Ruby or from legacy to a new app, or just adding tests or just extending functionality. And then we do in-person code reviews. And before the code review, we want to make sure, basically, the biggest ask on the newer developer is to write tests to cover the functionality, because the X unit is it's a pretty easy to use test suite, and it's similar. It's easily readable, so you can write tests even if you don't really understand the language. You can write tests to cover the things that you should know to happen, and as long as you get those tests passing, then that means that it's the first pass. Ask, talk about this and show them, I see, you're taking this idiom from Ruby, it doesn't really work in Elixir, this is how you use an Elixir. So having in-person code reviews, and also not fearing for making mistakes or being chastised for writing bad code or for writing inefficient code, I think is really important. As long as you have the open environment, that's really the key to adopting a language, or succeeding at all, I think.
What types of activities, or how has Bleacher Report created that environment, that culture of fail fast, learn from it, move on?
I think it's just sort of in, I don't know if it's an industry standard, but the idea, it's not, we don't want to fail so much as we want to be, I guess think of production as an ever-evolving rough draft of a story, in a sense, because I think especially earlier in my career, if I thought that whenever you deploy to production, it has to be perfect code, that's like, it's gone to the printer, the press, it's a finished book, I can't change it anymore. But now with continuous deployment, we deploy multiple times a day, so that if a bad deploy goes out, it's really easy to fix it and move on. So that's one of the things that we've done that way, and also just thinking about it as a continual work in progress helps a lot as well.
I like that. I like that mindset. Talking about this training, then, what would you say is the learning curve for someone who's interested in effectively using Elixir? More or less, how much time does that take you guys?
It also depends on it depends on your background as a programmer. If you're well versed, if you know a programming language well, then I don't think it's that bad. If it's your first programming language, I don't know. I think there are different concepts, but if you're coming to it fresh, it might be easier. But I think at work generally, the person, you give the person a couple weeks to get familiar with the language, and then they're writing production code, and then so, within a month, you're doing tickets by yourself. You're deployed. The in-person code reviews, you still have them, but maybe they're not as long or as detailed. So I think about a month or 2 months at the most to feel pretty confident in the language. And it's part of the, Elixir is a very explicit language. Documentation is first-class citizen. So there's not, it's much easier to follow the logic and to understand what's going on because it is so explicit. So I think that also helps out as well, because you see what's going on. The pipe operator in Elixir is just a pipe, and you can pass functions or results of functions or into different functions. So it's a really visual way to see what's going on. So instead of sort of chaining functions within each other, you can actually see, so it reads. So you have, user get email, send email, and it almost reads like a story. So I think that's also one of the things that make learning Elixir a bit easier.
So it is a smaller learning curve, you would say, then, with other.
It depends on the language and it depends on the person, but the barrier to entry is much lower than Clojure or Scala for sure.
Nice.
Yeah, for example, me, I'm a Java developer, a really strong object-oriented programming language, and to be honest, it has been easy to learn Elixir.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. Talking about the Bleacher report, did you move the whole stack to Elixir, or did you let some part in Ruby, or you decided to kill everything on Ruby?
It's still a work in progress. We're still porting legacy systems to Elixir, and I think at the end of that process, however long it takes, that the backend services will all be in Elixir. That's the goal. It's also easier for developers as well. because I don't. It's hard to switch between, in any context, it's hard to switch from one thing to another. But if you have, if you have to write Ruby code or Python and then switch to Elixir or Erlang or whatever, there's some cognitive load there that's not good. So to simplify backend development, I think the goal is to have everything in Elixir. But and when we were first evaluating it, it was a bit like, well, if we're going to do a new service, if it's going to be an internal sort of admin or something, it's just a lot easier when you have everything in the same language. So when everyone on the development team was also really thrilled with writing Elixir, then it became, it was much easier to say, okay, so we'll just use Elixir now. If there was a lot of pushback to use Ruby, then that would have been we would have had to probably thread that conversation a bit more carefully. But because the response to Elixir was overwhelmingly positive, we didn't have to. That wasn't even necessary.
Well, there is another question for Elixir. Well, we have been talking about, like the magic of Elixir and the love of Elixir and everything. But is there anything that you don't like about this programming language? Is there anything that you don't feel comfortable with?
No, I don't think there's anything that I dislike about the language. I think it's, let me think. I mean, if there's anything I dislike, it's sort of still my own, it's sort of still what I don't know about how the Erlang virtual machine works. So that's sort of, as I've learned more about Elixir, I mean, I know bits of Erlang, but the more that I know about Elixir, the more that I want to understand how the internals of the virtual machine work. So that's, if there's a frustration, it's just on me for not having enough time to go into the virtual machine itself, or learning more about the virtual machine. But no, I've been really pleased with the language. I can't think of anything off the top of my head that would say, this is no good. I mean, maybe, actually, okay, so here's one thing was sort of annoying, like, that's much better now, but, a year and a half ago or so, when libraries were well before 1.0 and lots of different things, and it was sort of the evolutionary explosion of Elixir and people coming in from different languages, dependency resolution was quite difficult because especially with Erlang dependencies, like the way that the author of the library would version a dependency might be slightly different than the way that the author of another language would version a dependency, which would makes it very difficult to handle dependencies. And Xometer was very difficult, for instance, getting that to work with everything. So you had to, fortunately, within Mix, within your Mix file, you can specify overrides for different dependencies, but then you ended up having, I mean, you have to include every dependency that Xometer had and all these things. So that was a bit annoying, but it was still overcomable, and it's to be expected when the language is only a few years old. So
yeah,
that's,
I'm sorry?
No, so that's sort of, that's not really much of a problem anymore, but it.
Yeah, I can guess that probably at the beginning when you move to Elixir, you struggle with the versions, right? Like you said before, like when you were using Phoenix and then suddenly it upgrade the version and then Ecto upgrade the version.
Yeah, that was a, but now things are really stable, so it's not an issue.
Yep. And like in the front end of Ledger Report, are you using something like Elm? Because every time I try to, like reading articles about Elixir, I always like step out with Elm topic. So, do you guys use Elm or?
I've used Elm a bit like as a hobbyist, but we use React for most everything on the front end, and that's what we're moving to on the front end. I mean, I've given I gave a presentation about Elm to the engineering group like 6 months ago or so, but I don't think that we're going to move to Elm anytime soon. It's definitely intriguing, and like the nice thing about Elm is that it's a functional programming language at the front end, so you have functional programming across the stack as opposed to switching between different paradigms that way. So that in an ideal world, that would be great to have that, because then you could work across the stack with a lot easier.
Okay. Well,
Is there a reason why React was chosen? Did Elm not exist when you got started, or
No,
why did you guys go?
Elm is still around, but it's still, I think it's on 0.18 now, so it's it's pretty far away from 1.0, and that would have been a pretty massive undertaking, and also there's a big design decision to switch the way the language. I mean, briefly, the language from 0.17 to 0.18, there was a dramatic change that had we used Elm, it would have been a lot of work to make those changes. And we were sort of experimenting with the language on the back end. We don't want to experiment with the language on both sides. And then we had, and also adopting Elixir. In the worst case, Elixir, I think in 2 or 3 years is going to be everywhere. It's going to be just as popular, as Ruby or Python, I think. But in the event that, say, Elixir didn't take off, worst case scenario, we could write everything in Erlang because we would have already understood the paradigms. We just would have had to adjust to the Erlang syntax. So because of the Erlang virtual machine, Elixir is sort of 30 years old almost, and Elm is new, and on the other side, Facebook backs React's from Facebook, so you have this big company behind it, so you're pretty sure that Elixir, that React isn't going to go away in the same way. So we try to hedge our bets with technology that we feel are going to be around for a while.
That's smart. I think I don't have any other questions for today. Do you, Jorge, Carlos?
Well, I guess that I have one that is basically, is it hard to find developers, like Elixir developers nowadays?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So, I mean, yes and no. So I'm one of the organizers of the Erlang Elixir meetup. So every month we have more people joining the meetups, and we have more interest in the language. And a lot of people are just starting out with the language, which is great. It's great to see all these new things. But then, yeah, how do you hire Elixir developers? So in the past, what we've done is, because there's traditionally been a Ruby shop. The way that we now do interviews is you basically get sort of an open-ended API test. You design an API, and most people have done that in Ruby, and then we ask them, are you interested in Elixir? What do you know about Elixir? And then during the on-site interview, basically, we want to see how, we want to gauge your interest in Elixir and these kind of things. So even if you do the language, test, if you design an API in Ruby or Python or Java, you can transfer those skills to Elixir really easily. Like, if critical thinking is the most important part about, your day-to-day job as a programmer. It's not, can you do whiteboard problems? Can you do, these, can you do these puzzle-type questions? So we try to mimic a work day during our interview. So if you can do this in Ruby or whatever, then you can do this in Elixir as well. Because and also part of that, when you hire, if you're looking for Elixir developers, gauge their interest. Have they heard about Elixir? Have they done anything Elixir? Do they have any sample projects to show in Elixir? So I think that's the best way to do it if possible. I mean, if you can find Elixir developers, then great. Then you can just have them take the do the API in Elixir or however you do your interviews. But if you can't, find enthusiastic learners in whatever language, because those skills will translate to Elixir just as well.
I like that tip a lot. Enthusiastic learners, and it can be taught, right?
Yes. Yeah. So.
All right. So I think, Ben, any last words of wisdom, any tips, any words of encouragement that you have for those people who are enthusiastic learners with Elixir and want to know more, learn more?
I mean, what's really nice, I think, about the Elixir community is that it's incredibly welcoming community. Like, if there's an Elixir Lang Slack channel, people, are always answering questions on there. People are very friendly, very encouraging for beginners or people who are interested in the language. I think over the next year, we're going to see more books come out on more specific topics in Elixir. And yeah, I think the biggest thing is with learning anything new, if you're going to, this happened to me, and this happens to me in any endeavor that I undertake, is, I do something and I have these small sort of accomplishments and I feel great, and then suddenly you hit a roadblock. So it's how you can get around that roadblock. And there are lots of resources for you to do that, like the Elixir Lang Slack channel or IRC, and various books and articles. So I think that just as long as you can find someone or work with someone to help you through those obstacles, that's probably the best way to do it.
So can Elixir Lang is the Slack channel?
Yeah, I think it's elixir-lang.slack.
Okay.
But I even think it's on the Elixir Lang website as well. So if you click on the Elixir Lang Slack, you'll find it.
Perfect. Any other favorites of yours for community outreach?
I mean, IRC, and then there's the Elixir Weekly that's done by Renee, and then Elixir Radar, which is sent out by Platform Attack, which is Jose Valim's company. So those will give you weekly updates on what's going on in the Elixir world, and those are both very well curated.
Perfect, thank you. We'll try to include some of those also, I believe, on our DojoLIVE website as well. So perfect. With that, I guess I have nothing else for us today. Thank you so much, Ben, for your time, for your passion. Congratulations, I think, for being involved and so enthusiastically in such a new language and bringing that to such a big company. And I wish you the best, and Bleacher Report and all that you do. So we'll see everyone next week for DojoLIVE, and thank you, Jorge, for joining us.
Thank you guys for letting me be here.
One last note. It's because since we've trained all of our developers here to use Elixir, and we've hired new Elixir developers. One of the really nice things is when people who have learned the language later than you start coming up with new ways to do things. So when you start learning from other people as well, that's the most rewarding thing, is to see this person who 6 months ago didn't know what Elixir was, and now they're writing, not only are they writing proficient code, but they're doing things in new ways that you hadn't thought of doing. So I think that's also really, really great, and it's really great to have these colleagues, to have our colleagues who are we have this really nice, gregarious, open environment where everyone's learning from each other.
And exciting, I imagine.
Yes.
Look what I figured out! Look at it there.
So that's worth the journey to getting, so when you're considering adopting Elixir, even though it's hard along the way, at the end the reward is really well worth it on every front. So thanks very much. I very much appreciate you having me on.
You're welcome. I'm not sure what to do here, because it seems that Carlos got sidetracked there at the Mountain Travel Symposium. He's the admin of the Google Live, the Hangout. So I'm like, I suppose we could just hang up, folks, and you can watch Carlos.
Are you Ben going to the next Elixir Conf in Seattle?
Oh yeah, I'll be there. I'm speaking at the Elixir Conf EU in Barcelona next month. No, in May. I can't remember if it's April or March, but I guess it's still March. So in May, and then Erlang Factory in Buenos Aires on June 30th, and speaking there as well. Which I'm really looking forward to, going to Buenos Aires and also seeing how people are using Elixir there as well, and Erlang.
So Elixir really does take you places.
Yes.
Pun intended.
Yes. I went with Richie and other friends to the last one, to the Orlando, the Elixir Phoenix conference, and it was pretty nice. I asked Richie, and he told me that you weren't there.
Oh yeah, I was at I spoke at the Erlang user conference in Stockholm. I actually never been to the Elixir conf in the US. I've only gone to the European one.
Really?
Oh.
Yeah, I know, tough.
Poor thing.
I know,
Yeah, hopefully I can catch you in the Seattle one. And
oh yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome.
Perfect. Okay, so I officially don't know how to hang up our DojoLIVE today. It looks like Carlos got sidetracked, presumably with someone here. So I guess we just hang up and log out, and he'll do his thing whenever he comes back.
Yeah, he's back. He's back.
Oh, there he is, Carlos. And we're just gonna say we're laughing texting Carlos because we weren't sure what to do. We were like, I don't know how to get off air now.
Oh, okay. No. Don't worry about it. I'm kind of keeping an eye on this because I was. Oh, by the way, Kim. Sorry, Ben. This is just a little parenthesis, but it's things that are happening here. Stuart Hart said hi. I just spoke with him like right now.
Hello. We spoke with him last week. So.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, Kim, the mic's all yours. If you want to, are you guys wrapping up?
We actually kind of wrapped it up about 5 minutes ago, and then we're kind of just chit-chatting and laughing because we were like, we don't know how to come off of the live on air. And they were talking about the different conferences that they've been to, and hopefully they'll cross paths one of these days soon. That is, if Ben can ever go to an Elixir conference stateside.
Yeah.
Oh, this time I'm going this year, barring the unexpected.
Well,
Perfect.
I think the only thing for me left for me to say is just thank you, Ben, for. Although I apologize because I was not really present, as it is customary on my end. I'm usually here, but like I said, it's a special occasion. So I want to thank I want to thank the audience, and I want to thank also my fellow Nearsoftians here as ever. And that's all on my end. So Kim, if you want to do the honors and wrap it up.
We will. Thank you. Go ahead to our website, DojoLIVE, and we'll be posting some of those good references that Ben has for us. And yeah, share the word, Elixir enthusiasts. Congratulations again, and thank you, Ben.
I think thanks.
Bye for now.
All right. Thank you. Have a great day, everyone. And